let me introduce myself. I'm Ann Griffith. I'm here representing RDJ, working with MHA, and this is my colleague Laura Kozlowski, also with RDJ. And I think folks know why we're here, but I'll repeat it. We're here for our consultants. I'm going to pause for a moment so folks can, We're here for the opportunity for our consultants, CVR, is happening, to present to the group the results of the research that they have been doing over these many months. So they will take the time to walk through the process and remind everyone who has not been following every step of the process, all those steps. But we're here for an important part of a very important process. So welcome everyone. I'm going to bring up CVR team, let them do their introductions. Also, of course, we have Louis here, who is MHA, somewhere in the back. And we'll go ahead and get started. But let me just tell you about how this evening will run. We'll have our presentation, which for those of you who have not received a copy of it, there are copies in the back. And our consultant team will walk us through that presentation. And if folks can hold their questions for the presentation, we're going to complete the presentation, and then we're going to break for a quick second. Get food quickly, come back to our seats, and spend the rest of the time in question and answer. We're going to turn the lights off for our presentation, so we don't want folks with food spilling on their laps. I think it'll be a little bit neater this way. We'll have a nice, concise presentation, and then we'll open it up. And our plan is, respecting everyone's time, to be done by 8 o'clock. Sound like a plan? Yes.
Can you just give us what the estimated time is for the presentation so that we can estimate how much time is left for?
Before you,
30 minutes.
About 30 minutes.
30 minutes for the presentation.
Yeah. We're not going to do it on the clock, but that's our best guess. All right? Sound like a plan? Excellent. So without ado, then let me bring up Pradeep to begin introductions of our consultant team.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Pradeep Rosha. This is Dan Wildchild. I am with a firm called CVR Associates. We're a consulting firm focusing on affordable housing around the country. Dan is the president of Wildchild Zoning Collaborative, which is a design and architectural and design firm that does work on affordable housing also across the country. Another of our team members is CSG Advisors, which is a San Francisco-based financial consultant on affordable housing. Dan and I are here this evening to try to make this presentation. We're trying to make it a balance of not spending too much time on a PowerPoint, but at the same time we're attempting to reduce about 130 plus pages of a report into about 30 minutes, so that it gives you context. You do have the presentation with you. There will be some slides that we will just try to move quickly so that you're not spending time, and then once we take a break so that people can eat, we'll focus on your questions and we'll do our very best to answer them. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for being part of this process. Laura, let's go through the introduction. Basically, these are the several steps, but I don't want to stop on every slide because we'll take the time. So you have these. We can go through that, skip over who these are the firms and who we are, and we're going to give a little bit of the process, and Dan and I will sort of be interacting as we go through the slides.
Thank you, Pradeep. It's great to be back here. This is our 4th trip back during this process. Just a reminder of how we got here. This process actually started in 2009. You're all aware of that, with the advisory board being formed. And then in 2015, the community working group. Then that became a task force process, which then hired CVR, and that's where we are today. Next. So this is a very important point to the presentation. I want to make sure we're trying to communicate with you. We were hired by the Housing Authority. We actually have a contract. In that contract, there's specific language of what we're supposed to do, just like any contract between two parties. And if you look at the first line, the feasibility, this line, that we're tasked with evaluating options. We had to understand what the Housing Authority meant by evaluating those options. Okay? So the Housing Authority put a sentence in our contract and partially goes like this. Evaluation is to determine the best and most feasible revitalization scenarios. Okay? So to take those options and to determine the best and most feasible revitalization scenarios. So what I want to focus on at the beginning of this presentation is those two words, options and scenarios. Options were given to us, okay? And the two options was historic preservation and revitalization and mixed income. Those are called options. That is part of our contract. We were then, what we do as consultants, is to take those options and turn them into scenarios. That's what our contract says. Now as a consultant, when you are given a task like this, you have to decide how do you get there. The first thing we do is we try to understand the context in which those options were delivered to us. Okay? The context is the history of this process, which we did our diligence to try to find out as much as we could about this history. And when you think about this history between these two options and the residents and the Housing Authority, there is a history there, and it's an emotional history. So we are aware of the history that delivered these both options. What we're trying now to do is to try to come up with scenarios. And to do that, we did research. We used our expertise and experience. We wanted to discover and clarify opportunities and challenges of both options. So we looked at both options in a very deep manner. And as consultants, what we want to do was to elevate and enhance both options and turn them into scenarios. So there may have been some understanding or misunderstanding of what we were tasked to do. We wanted to make that clear. You'll have time to ask questions to that, very good questions and answers. Next. Talking about the history, this was the guiding principles that were done back in January, and this was done by the community working group. We're not going to go through all those, but certainly number one, protect existing Golden Gate households. It's listed as number one probably for a reason. It seems to be over and over the most important goal that we have. There are other goals that are equally important, but protecting the existing resident households is very, very important. Next. Community engagement. This was an interesting one to try to talk about. There's several ways to describe our process in working with the community. We can use adjectives like intense. We can use adjectives like bumpy. In fact, we got an email this week from someone that says, let's not sugarcoat this process. And we're here to tell you that we want to be real, to understand that we've had some challenges during this process, both from a communication standpoint in delivering information and trying to hear you as best we could. It has been bumpy, but we've gotten through that. We've had a lot of meetings. Each time we come into town, we're here for about 3 days meeting with multiple stakeholders. But it has been a bumpy process. The report will talk about that as well. We'll make sure that we don't sugarcoat that. So we're aware of that. Next slide. So going into the background, next slide. What we want to make you aware of is, as Pradeep mentioned, there is a report that has about 130 pages. The report is broken down into two parts. The first part of the report is a narrative about the findings. The second part of the report are appendices, which have about 9 or 10 different parts to it. The reason we did that was if we put this all together as a 135-page report, it would be very hard to get through. So during your reading of the report, those first 58 pages, it will refer to the appendices for things if you wanted to take a deeper dive. And we're not going to go through all the appendices, but one of the appendix has to do with the history of Marin, some background, some cultural history, and housing challenges in California as an example. But the appendixes go from A to I, so you'll be able to see all that. Next. The P&A. This is something I think that we tried a couple of times to deliver, and we're going to try to deliver it today with greater clarity. And it's been a challenge to deliver this, and I'm hoping we can make some progress today. What you will find in the report is Appendix G is actually the Excel spreadsheet that has all the math of the P&A. Now, what is a P&A? P&A is a fiscal needs assessment. It happens every 5 years. And one of the things that happened during I believe it was our second time down here, where we dropped the information, and this project has about $50 million of hard costs. And when we did hard costs, meaning construction costs, when we did that, you could hear a pin drop because we don't believe that number had ever been elevated. Okay? And there's a reason for that. And I want to take a moment here, we're going to do a little deeper dive into the P&A to try to at least communicate better than we have before. There's 2 slides here. The first slide has to show that a P&A is a timeline. And what a P&A does is it says what repairs are needed every year for a series of years. And when you're looking at trying to put the construction cost together for a project, the standard in the industry is to look at 20 years. 20 years meaning if you're going to do a project that we invest in fixing it up, instead of doing it piecemeal every single year, that if you looked at a 20-year cycle, that's the value of the construction cost to fix it for a 20-year period. So we're starting here to show you just on the graph, the number that was talked about before our arrival was somewhere around 16 million. That was an accurate number, but what we want to make sure we're communicating, that was accurate for year 1, immediate needs, which was 2015. But that number lacked was what happened in 2016 and 17 and so on. What we're showing you here, and just in the first 3 years and the next 2 years, how another 6 million have to be added. Now we did want to show you a chart that goes out here to number 20, but that is in the appendix. And what we find is in year 10, the boilers start to fail in the high-rises. And they are $1 million hits. So what happens is, as you build up over time, these numbers add up. Okay? So that's how we started to go from that 16 number higher. But that's not all. The P&A did not include costs that we know that you want and we know that the site needs. So the P&A is done by a firm who crawls through the site and crawls through the buildings and does their best to get an understanding of what needs to be fixed. But it didn't do enough. So if you go to the next slide, we're going to show you how this stack is built. And we're going to take time to just make sure we go through that and may limit the number of questions during the Q&A period, but I'll try to do this quickly. If you take the entire P&A that was done in 2015 and go out to that 20-year period and just look at the hard cost, that number is about $24 million. So if you saw that $16 million number in year 1, there's another $8 million going over the next 20 years. Excuse me?
Say it was completely rehabbed. Those costs wouldn't be that high, would they, from going forward year to year, that's maintained?
No.
But they never were maintained.
Yeah, and in fact, we'll talk about that in a moment. So what happens with the P&A, they not only have the cost when you have to fix a boiler, but the P&A, this is just a little detail, also includes what they call repeated costs. So for instance, over a 20-year period, you may have to put in carpeting 3 times, if carpeting only lasts 7 years. We took out those repeated costs. Okay, we did not add those in because we thought that would unnecessarily inflate the hard cost. The reason we took that out is when a developer comes in or a development happens, they have an operational reserve to fix things like carpeting and drywall and things that don't last 20 years. So we actually took out about $3 million of those repeated costs. Now this next block here, so that's the $24 million from the P&A. The next $3 million is inflation. So what we had to do was, these costs were done in 2015. If this project goes through, it could go through in 2019, perhaps. So we had to take 4 years of inflation. It was a modest number, but when you do the math, it was about $3 million. But the green is the biggest part, okay? And the green is the cost of additional items. And I have the list. The list is also in the report. It's listed in a table. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to mention some of them. We're here on a wet day, so that's important. We noticed significant erosion and stormwater issues all over this site. Whether it's the mudslide up behind the high-rises, or the slope by Cole Drive, or the basin that has even bigger issues, there's nothing in the P&A to cover stormwater management. So we put a number in to do that, to cover erosion, to cover some of the restoration of the landscaping. Okay, we know how important that is. We know trees are cut down. You're wondering why some trees are cut down, what sort of variety of trees are going in. None of that was in the P&A, so we added a number for that. That was a big number. We also added a number for green energy. We know a deep green rehab is very important. There's nothing in the P&A for that. So I'm not going to go through all these things, but basically we added, list by list, another $16 million of things that we know you want, okay? And you can decide when you look at the table, well, maybe you don't want those, but we thought those needed to be part of the project. The blue and the yellow are just costs that are added in the construction industry when you have hard costs. The P&A is just the physical cost of the subcontractors to do the work. That's called really overhead and profit and general condition. Those are those two little stacks. So if you go from here to here, that number adds up to 50 million. That's how that 16 million increased to 50 million. The orange are what's called soft costs with any large construction project, or really any construction project. Soft costs are not construction costs, but they're administrative costs, whether it's legal, accounting, engineering, architecture, things like that. And those are done on a percentage basis. So that's how that stack works, the 50 million plus the soft costs. And we can get into the questions and answers.
Is that soft costs alone?
The 12 million is soft costs alone, and that's broken down in the report. Okay, next slide. Public housing environment tests.
You want me to talk?
Pretty.
So this community is facing a series of issues, but it's not happening in a vacuum. There are very significant problems being faced by public housing communities across the country. We are in a situation where this housing authority, as Dan's been talking about the needs, and you look at those numbers, whether it's 16 million or the 60 million, they're still big numbers. And you find that this housing authority gets less than 1,800,000 total, of which not all of which it would even be available per year for capital repairs and funds that it would utilize, which is not even adequate to do a year's worth of repairs for what is needed here. And each year that repairs aren't made, things tend to get worse. But again, it's not happening exclusively here. It is a problem that's happening everywhere. It is, whether you want to, as I was saying to somebody, regardless of which administration or which party is in power, there has been a decline in the amount of money being invested in public housing in the United States. And we did, one of the things you see here is, over the course of 10 years, the amount of capital funding that this agency receives has gone down by $227,000 that it has lost over 10 years. Congress is not allocating enough money for public and affordable housing in the United States. We are pointing out the last bullet there where we talk about as public housing agencies face these problems, periodically there have been analyses done. The last one done showed that nationally there was a need of over $26 billion in repairs that were needed to be made to public housing across the country. and that was 4 years ago. And it's continued to increase, and the amount of money that Congress has allocated for housing has continued to decrease. So, next slide. In our case here, when you talk about $61 million and annual capital funds of $800,000, you are faced with a very severe problem. You are extremely limited in the amount of money you receive. At the same time, public housing units are covered by something called the Declaration of Trust. And it is a legal document that protects the housing authority and protects HUD's interest and HUD's investment in the housing authority. So the good thing about it is that if someone sues the housing authority, they can't say, I'm putting a lien and I'm going to become the new owner of Golden Gate Village. No one can do that. The flip side, or perhaps negative side of it is, public housing, you cannot borrow against it, you cannot put any debt on it, you can't go to a bank and say, I need a construction loan to make these repairs. So you are prohibited under this scenario from getting any other kind of resources that you might be able to get for any other type of housing. So any scenario with the public housing is extremely limited in what kind of income it can bring in and what kind of resources it can access to make any improvements. You want to talk about this?
So now we're going over our approach. And remember our first session, we introduced the ESP analysis. The ESP analysis has to do with making projects sustainable by balancing the economic, social, and physical attributes of a project. All of those three things need to be in balance, so there's synergy between all three. As an example, if you have a project that just makes money for the people who develop it, but doesn't treat the people the way that they need to be treated, and physically is a mess, that's not a successful project. It's only a successful project for one small group. Similarly, if you have a project that physically is very strong, meaning it's a beautiful project, but again, doesn't treat the social needs well or economically is a disaster, that's not very good either. So what we need to do is try to understand these economic, social, and physical components to get an understanding of how they can work together to make this a very strong outcome. If you go to the next slide, this is sort of how we describe some of the more important ESP elements. We go into deeper dive in the report. So in this project, from an economic standpoint, we need to understand how this is financed. You know, I remember when we did one of our sessions, session 1, and we asked what's on people's mind. They said, just give us the money. That's really all we need. Well, you know, if the money dropped from the sky and that happened, you're right, that probably would be all that you need. The money doesn't drop from the sky. There has to be a financial objective to actually capture this money, not only initially, but over a long term. We'll get into that through the series of phasing. During our analysis, we also reviewed one of the things that we were handed during our sessions with the resident council was a possible series of sources of funding, which we looked at, and that's in the report as well. From a social standpoint, we had our community engagement process. We understand all the different times we're out here and how we try to communicate. We looked at all the social goals from the community working group. And from a physical standpoint, we're as intimate with the site as we can be. In the number of trips that we've had here, the diligence that we've put in, touring around, meeting you, walking around. The P&A, we've been doing a deep dive, and now with this report, you have all the information that we have. And then, obviously, what a wonderful thing that happened during the process. The historical designation approval. Seeing that process go through, seeing the grassroots effort that started with, seeing the diligence of the consultants who worked on that, was really heartwarming. Learning about the history of this place, not only from a physical standpoint, but from a social standpoint. If you know these things are great, and not from their just physical beauty, but also the social gravitas behind this, was just amazing. So that obviously happened during the process. So that was something that we obviously had to take into account. Next.
So this slide and the next couple identify terms that we use. One of the things we recognize, we work in this industry all the time, we use a lot of terms. HUD speak includes a lot of acronyms, but we try to identify some of the key terms that we use, and you have them. I'm not going to read you the definitions. I want to touch on a couple of them. I mentioned DOT, the Declaration of Trust. Tax credits is something we talk a lot about, and there are a variety of tax credits. There's historic tax credits with regard to the historic designation, but there are low-income housing tax credits, often called LIHTC for short, and within those there are 4% credits and 9% credits, which bring different levels of equity and investment. The 9% are the better ones to get because it generates more income for a redevelopment or a rehabilitation project, but they're very competitive, and they are by state, and California is one of the states that has a very large allocation of tax credits, but it's also highly competitive. Next slide. PBVs are project-based vouchers, and I will try to explain that really quickly, which is people know about public housing, and they generally know about Section 8 housing choice vouchers, which are vouchers that an individual or family may have, and they can take to any landlord and say, I'm going to use this to help pay my rent. Project-based vouchers are vouchers that are not tied to an individual, they're tied to a unit. And those vouchers, whether an individual moves or doesn't move, the voucher and the subsidy that flows with it stays tied to that unit. And they are a source of utilizing that future income against which to borrow or leverage that money for additional investment on the property. So that's why they're important. Next slide, please. The other term that I wanted to focus on for a moment is RAD, Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. And it is a program that allows housing authorities to convert their public housing to a subsidy platform. It was something that started under the Obama administration, and this is now my own personal opinion, but it is where HUD is going. The only things that are happening today where HUD is approving things are when they're going toward a RAD platform. Not the traditional public housing with subsidies, but rather converting to a RAD platform, which we get into in depth in the report, and we will here and try to answer your questions as well with regard to it. But as we put out in the bullets here, it's a repositioning tool. It allows the residents that are public housing to remain in the same units, to be protected, to pay the same level of rent that they have to pay, which is 30% of their income. It allows you to borrow, it allows you to bring in investment, it allows you to get tax credits under this platform. You do have to apply for it, and it works both for rehabilitation as well as new development or new reconstruction. So it is part of what we ultimately recommend here, and that's why we highlighted it here. And again, I can not belabor the point because I know we're trying to move quickly, but we can try to answer questions about that afterward.
Okay, findings. The next 4 slides are very, very important and may be the source of many of your questions during the question and answer period. So what I'm going to try to do is give you a framework for our findings. And after we do that, Pradeep is going to go into detail on the 2 scenarios that we elevated and give you a rationale for why we chose one. Okay? So again, if you remember the way our contract was written, we were given 2 options, and then we were to determine different scenarios and trying to find which scenarios were feasible. Now, option 1, which was the historic preservation and revitalization, we deemed infeasible. We deemed infeasible for 2 reasons. I'm just going to mention them, we can go into depth. One had to do with funding. The gap was just too large because of funding to just renovate this project and keep it at public housing in the same platform that it's on. We did not find a match for it. The gap was too large. However, it's the second issue that is very important that we introduced but did not introduce into depth. But it had to do with the effect of displacement with this option. So try to summarize that. We're telling you that you have a $50 million project to renovate this community. $50 million is a large construction amount. The site is a little over 32 acres. It's a large project. We have residents living in 296 households here. A contractor approaching this does not have the ability to say, everybody leave, and we're just going to fix this whole place up, right? That doesn't happen. The project is big enough where they would do this in phases. The phases for this project would be somewhere between 4 and 5 phases, depending on the contractor breaking it down. 4 or 5 phases might be taking the high-rises, the 8 buildings, and doing those in 2 distinct phases. Taking the low-rises, doing those in 2 or 3 phases. But the contractor is not going to be able to do this on a unit-by-unit basis. They're not going to have 296 phases that allows one family to leave and you fix up their house and they come back, because we have significant infrastructure problems on this site. We're fixing stormwater, site utilities, we're doing erosion control, we're doing landscaping. We're actually cordoning off quadrants of this site during these 4 or 5 phases. That means 60 to 80 households need to go somewhere during this time. And each phase may take a year or 2. So what you're looking at is the possibility of trying to find 60 to 80 units of affordable housing in Marin County over a period of 4 or 5 phases. Very challenging. You know that as much as we do. So the lack of trying to solve that was a very big challenge in option 1. Okay. Option 2, which was mixed income, we were given mixed income without a plan. There was no set metrics to tell us how much mixed income or what type of mixed income. So when you think of a mixed income environment, if a developer's walking in here and didn't know anything about the social nature of the situation, mixed income might understand to just level everything and build something new. Well, obviously that would not fly. So what happened with option 2, mixed income, we had to take that to a scenario to understand what level of mixed income. And we're going to explain that very clearly, how we came up with a level that was much more gentle than just looking at the entire site. So we'll get into this in a little more detail. If you go to the next slide. Again, I'm trying to do a framework here. These are the 6 scenarios that we looked at. And before we go over these, if you go to the next slide and the next slide. There you go. What we looked at when we looked at those 6 scenarios, we had to determine which ones were feasible and which ones were not feasible in order to do a deeper dive into 1 or 2 of them. So we put together this filter of ESP, economic, social, and physical, to understand what would make a scenario infeasible. Okay? The first one's obvious. If we didn't have enough money, if we couldn't find the funding sources, that makes the scenario infeasible. Number 2, if it would present substantial relocation or displacement, obviously that's a non-starter. That would make it infeasible. And number 3, not necessarily because of the historic designation, but certainly the historic designation puts a spotlight on it. If there was a substantial physical challenge or change to this site, that could make it infeasible. And we understand that. So if you now go back a slide, yeah, right there. So what we did was we listed the 6 scenarios that we came up with. We'll summarize those. And we tried to say why they were infeasible. And what you'll see is number 5 and 6 were actually, we thought, were feasible. The reason that 5 and 6 are feasible, as Pradeep mentioned, is that they include the RAD conversion, which he talked about a few moments ago. If you look at scenarios 1, 2, 3, and 4, the main reasons they were infeasible had to do with funding gap, had to do with the amount of displacement over those 4 or 5 phases. So that was just fixing up the place and keeping it at public housing. That's why that was determined infeasible. On the comprehensive, the word comprehensive means almost totality. If mixed income was given to us without any metrics, we would term that infeasible because of the physical effect on this beautiful site. We wouldn't see that as being a feasible outcome. What we then did on number 3, we said, well, what if mixed income from a scenario standpoint didn't include the entire site, but maybe we preserve the high rises and just try to redevelop the low rises? And we ran some financial scenarios of that. But again, the effect on the site of looking at the low rises and seeing them totally change, we deemed infeasible. Number 4 was very interesting, project-based vouchers. What you'll notice in the economic analysis is that it looks like a very good financial scenario. But what people will get into is to say that project-based vouchers really aren't a reality at this point in time. And maybe you want to point that out.
Just quickly, there are limitations on how a housing authority is allowed to use their voucher allocation. These are limitations imposed by HUD. So while you can get about 30% of your entire voucher allocation and have it converted to project-based vouchers, there are a number of tests that have to be met even to get 30%. We don't, given that so many people are utilizing vouchers and the need is so great in the community, we find it highly unlikely that in the near future and foreseeable future the housing authority would be able to do that. In addition, it would be required by HUD to meet an obsolescence test, which would mean that the housing authority would have to prove that the cost of these units to be rehabilitated is so extreme that it requires that they almost be demolished. It's a financial economic formula, but it would be very, very challenging, if not impossible, for the housing authority to meet it. So therefore, the concept, which might otherwise be pretty attractive, because project-based vouchers bring higher income and higher subsidies, but the concept of turning the entire site to project-based vouchers, we also deemed it infeasible.
And then just to finish up here, comprehensive green rehabilitation is keeping the site exactly as is, doing the complete renovation, but with RAD conversion, it makes it a feasible scenario to look at. Partial redevelopment is taking comprehensive, which means everything, redevelopment of the site of the low-rises, and takes that down to the word partial. Now you may ask, well, what does partial mean? That was not our job. Our job was not to physically design this site, to talk about how we can fit in enough housing to make this a mixed income development. That will be up to the next series of processes. But with partial redevelopment, one of the goals there was to create a build-first mentality, and we'll go into this when we go into the scenarios, where you would build just enough housing to take people who are temporarily displaced from renovating their quadrant of the site and to stay on site. That's the idea behind partial redevelopment. So if you go into the next slide, Pradeep's going to go over how we assess the financial feasibility, and then to end the program, he's going to go into what we're calling Scenario A and Scenario B.
So one of the things I realized as we're standing here, feasibility is a word that we use so much in this presentation and this report, and I realize that it can be subjectively interpreted by different people. We have lawyers in the room who would argue lots of things about what is feasible, but we try to identify some things that would help us be uniform in our approach to that. So the financial aspects being so important and the financial feasibility, so a funding source that, we have rules, all of these funding sources have rules. Can we meet them? Are the proposed scenarios able to, fall within the rules that the different funding sources require you to have met? Is there a likelihood of continued funding so that it's not just a one-time thing, because this isn't going to be anything that is done here, whether it's rehabilitation or some level of redevelopment, is not going to happen in one phase, and certainly not going to happen in one funding cycle or 1 year. It's going to be multiple years. So is there a likelihood of continued receipt of those funds so that it's viable? You don't want to start something and then not be able to finish it. Does the project meet the threshold for many of these sources, which are competitive? So the most desirable source is going to be 9% tax credits, which will bring, and all of these things move, and the numbers move. I will explain in a second one thing that's happening even as we speak. But the most desirable source would be 9% tax credits. The value of 9% tax credits, often identified as an equity raise, changes. And with the new tax law lowering the amount of corporate tax, it is actually creating that the level of investment in low-income housing tax credits is going down, because corporations like Apple or Google or Clorox or whoever generally invest in low-income housing tax credits because they get a credit against their taxes. By lowering from 35% to 20% the corporate tax rate, we have just taken away one of the biggest incentives to have people invest in low-income housing. So those numbers are changing. How they will ultimately change, I don't know, but nobody knows right now. But it's certainly one factor that the new tax law, which everybody has heard about, but nobody really knows exactly what it says yet, is going to have an impact. But it's important that we try to meet those competitive sources, that we meet the requirements to be competitive in applying for those funds. And, you know, we talk a lot about funding gaps, and the funding gaps here are always, you know, numbers that are in the 7 figures and not 8 figures, but that are reasonably met. Let's say good developers, good contractors, people you bring in, or the housing authority chooses to go, whether it's for rehabilitation or redevelopment, as we say, partial redevelopment. If you're going to need to bring in a thoughtful, experienced firm to assist with that. And part of what they do is meet those funding gaps, whether it's other applications, national or state applications, or things like that. It's impossible in a vacuum to determine every possible scenario and know exactly how much is going to be needed, but we know that any of these scenarios do leave you with a funding gap that has to be met. And we wanted to try to address those within what we thought was attainable, and that's what we were deeming to be feasible. The 2 scenarios that we ultimately deemed feasible, as we said, are 2. Comprehensive green rehabilitation and RAD conversion. Again, you're going to see both options involve moving to RAD and not staying as traditional public housing. The thing about RAD is that is where HUD is going right now, but as I mentioned earlier, it allows you to leverage, it allows you to bring in additional, whether it's loans, investments, tax credits, and it protects the residents. So the residents get to stay, they don't have to move, they get to keep paying the same level of rent, they are protected with the same protections that are available under a traditional public housing scenario. And the partial redevelopment with green rehabilitation, with RAD conversion, again, RAD because of the financial needs of either scenario. So scenario A would be keeping all of the units, converting the entire community to RAD. It takes it off the public housing platform under the voucher subsidy platform, which allows you to get debt, tax credit equity. You are allowed to use tax credit equity to rehabilitate the units. You would keep the same level of units here. You could bring in some level of green technology, and all of the residents that are in good standing get to stay here. 296 units, you end up with 296 units. So we think it would be something that would definitely have to be phased over probably 5 phases. The work would be using a combination of different sources. So we talked about mixed income, but often mixed income is mixed income and mixed finance combined. So mixed finance meaning different sources of funding for whatever activity, whether it's rehabilitation or redevelopment. All of those would be needed. We do some estimates, again, much more detail in the report, but there's a significant gap. There are benefits and challenges to both scenarios. The benefits, the site is historically preserved, although we are doing that in both cases that we recommend. You can bring in some new technology. You can bring in additional funding. There are some significant challenges, which is why when we ultimately are asked to make, because our contract asks us to ultimately make a final recommendation, we actually go with scenario B. Because one of the things that's very difficult here is how do you rehabilitate this community and, as has been requested, not move people out of their units? And how do you rehab, as Dan explained, the challenges, even in a phased way? Where would you put people? So it becomes very difficult to do the significant rehabilitation without displacing people from Golden Gate Village. Because, as you all know, there aren't too many affordable housing options in Marin County. So where would people go if you're going to do that? Scenario B, the one we ultimately think is a better option for everyone concerned here. That's a subjective term, I also know. Again, we would go to the RAD platform, be able to borrow, whether it's through actual borrowing, construction loans, things like that, using tax credit equity. It allows us to use additional units on the site, as Dan said, to be built first, and use those to be able to move people while other units are rehabilitated. And it creates additional units on the site to bring in additional income. We came up with this number by looking at what the current zoning is for the site and what it allows. And Dan, who has done a great deal of work in community design and affordable housing around the country, very mindful of, and he probably become incredibly knowledgeable about the history of the site. He went through the application and the whole process of the historic designation and the significance of it. And I have to say that, I mean, even if I'm not an architect, as I often say, I'm a recovering attorney, but you come here and you realize you have a beautiful site and you have beautiful structures. It would be criminal to get rid of them. It is important to, whatever you do, maintain the community, the history, and the beauty of the site. So if you were allowed to put 1,000 units on the site, you'd be destroying it. But we looked at what does zoning allow and what could possibly be done. So that's a number we came up with. Anybody else can come up with a different number. It might be higher, it might be lower. But going from the 296 units to 420 total units allows you to bring in a little bit of additional housing, allows you to bring in some additional income through some market rate units, some low-income housing tax credit only units, and some PBBs.
If I could just point one thing out, go back to 420. The math of it is 32.3 times 13 equals 420. That's how we got to the 420. When we met with zoning down at the county, they did tell us that density can be increased for affordable housing. Now that means developers who give us what we need, more affordable housing, is allowed to build at a higher density. Okay, so just want to let you understand going forward that a developer can look at this and say, well, 420 is allowable, but with the added density for affordable housing, we can go more. So that's something that's going to be important to follow.
Where would you put it up? That's what I want to know.
Where would it go?
Yeah.
And
Where-
what is,
where-
what is,
where-
how
how are you gonna fit it in?
Preservation.
How are you going to do historic preservation and add
And then do that.
Or how are you going to do that?
Is there
So,
a limit on
what?
where you can put the
Thank you.
housing?
I'm
Thank you.
great. I would love to design this project for you. That was not part of our scope of service. As an architect, let's talk about, we're in the feasibility study right here. Although I would love to tell you exactly where those 120 units go without destroying the historical integrity, with preserving and enhancing open space, and giving you deep green, I would love to do that. That's not part of the study. But going forward, what needs to be focused on is that word partial. So remember, in scenario B, it's partial. Okay? Now, developers would come in here, architects and urban designers would come in here, they'd see what you have here, and they would begin to get an understanding of where that might go. But that is really for the next phase of study. Okay, next.
Could I ask a question?
I think we're going to wait for questions. We're running over. We only have 6 more slides. We have 2 more slides. And
We're almost,
again, this is the framework, and you'll have time for questions, but we're running 15 minutes over right now.
So, in essence, the additional partial redevelopment or new development, the additional units, allow you to bring in additional income. When you have, for example, a project-based voucher contract for 40 units, you then can take that number, multiply it over 20 years, and say this is going to be our income for these units. And you can borrow against that and use that money to do the rehabilitation that you need to do on the existing units. So it is a combination that we felt was the best way to utilize the site in the best way, still preserve the historic designation, not displace the residents, not even have them move out of the community at any given time, just staying still within the community and being able to do this rehabilitation. Still looking at probably 5 phases. So it is not something that would happen readily or easily.
Just to add something, and we can go through the next slide if you want. When he says 5 phases, you want to make sure if you remember anything from this presentation. Phase 1 is a build-first strategy. So phase 1 in scenario B is you build first to get at least, at the very least, the number of households that would be temporarily displaced from the first phase of renovation. It's like a hotel on the site, if you want to think of it that way. Some people may stay there, some people may choose to stay there and moving back, but it's a build-first strategy. So that is one of the important defining characteristics between scenario A and scenario B. Other than that, the scenarios are very similar. I think we went over all this.
Yeah, I think we've gone over this. No question, there's still challenges. If there were an answer that were clearly the simple answer, you guys would have come up with it already. There isn't a simple answer to how to address all the different factors and needs that exist to revitalize this community, respect the historic designation that it has, respect the residents who live here, and make it all happen easily. There are no simple answers. So there are still factors that will have to be addressed. We're happy to get into that. I know that Anne is looking at me like, wind it up. So,
just keep going. Keep going. We went through all that. We did that verbally. Go to the next slide. Next step, somebody said what happens next. These 4 things are not in any particular order. We know how important this is, right? Continue to meeting with residents. We know that that is the foundation upon the steps that came before us and the steps that will become after us. Extending those relationships out to the community, also vitally important. Procuring a development partner, that's going to be critical and maybe the next stage that you're looking at least talking to. And then getting involved in the RAD program. Next. And these are the principles. We can end on this slide, really. These are the principles that we hope we can follow and leave as a legacy of this process. That each one of these needs to be checked off as you go forward, and that's in your packet.
So first of all, I just want to extend a thank you to the CVR team for all that work that you guys have put in making this presentation, and also thank you to everyone in this room who just sat through a really long presentation and got to absorb a lot of information. So now is that good time that all those questions that you guys have had, that we get to ask them those questions. So I'm going to try and help these guys in terms of calling on folks so that they can answer questions. So feel free to continue to get food if you want food, and we'll be out of here for 8:15. So first question. Okay.
Okay, the first one is with historic preservation status, does that limit, because the housing authority gets money from HUD, and it's my understanding with historic status that no change or no addition could be on the property. So where would all this other housing go?
So do you want me to go 3 questions, or do you want
I
to
can answer that question. It's probably better to do it one at a time.
Okay.
The historic designation is very important, but it does not rule out change. What it does do is put you under a process to understand if that change is appropriate. So there's something called character defining features of the site that is part of your application. And if there was modifications, and modifications can happen, including demolition. I'm not saying how much, but historical designation does not preclude modifications.
Unless the owner gets money from HUD or debt, money from the federal government.
I'm not sure about that part.
No, the historic designation does not come with any additional funding.
No,
You
it
are-
doesn't. If a historical site receives federal funding, then there's a greater restriction on what they can do with the property. And as a housing authority, they do get federal funding for all the housing programs and programs that they administer. So I was asking if they get that, because the housing authority receives funding from the federal government, there's extra protection for historic sites from demolition or new addition or anything. So what I studied about
Now, the funding that the housing authority gets remains the same. And I understand, I understand. I'll try to answer it, just 1 second. But it does not provide any additional or any less of a protection. As Dan said, the designation, which comes from a different part of the federal government, allows for certain things to be happening if it's not kept exactly the
Even
same.
if it's not a housing authority, if it's another historic site and they get funding from the federal government, then it's protected.
I think what your question is, because it's federal, is that why the historic
No,
preservation?
It could be XYZ ice cream shop that gets
So-
money somehow from the federal government.
Doesn't
Whatever's
matter.
historically preserved, if they get money from the federal government, there's another level of requirement to maintain it.
So, hold on 1 second. I think what I'm hearing you say, let's make sure that we're all on the same page so that we can actually answer your question. What I hear you say is that that you are
Properties that have historic designation, regardless of what they are, if they get federal funding,
so there's I'm not sure if you're asking whether or not that's true, or
I guess you guys.
because I
don't
think
know about.
that the first question is that true? Do properties that get federal
No,
funding
they
have
do,
a different?
they do, and that's what I'm saying. The question is,
Okay.
doesn't that pertain to the housing authority, because they do get federal funds? And so that might put a limit on the type of development that you go there, because the whole property and the landscape, the whole design of the property itself, in addition to the building, is either
Absolutely. Anything that we're going to, if anything were to be done on the site, it does have to go through a process. And I'm going to take the word that you're saying that that process is more strict because the housing authority gets federal funds than it would be for somebody else.
right.
I'm
Like
not-
my house, I don't get federal funds. Well, it's just say, or anybody, they're not getting funds from the government. So yeah, they could paint it and add another floor on it or whatnot, you know. I'm just saying, are significantly changing. But there's a stricter criteria for owners that are things that are federally historic preservation that they cannot do under the
There
historic
is
preservation.
a way, there is a process that anybody would have to go through, but definitely the housing authority and any
It
developer
might
that
be
they brought in.
greater restriction because the housing authority is
So yes, okay. So I think we're on.
Okay.
I think we're good on that one, that there are, but we don't know what restrictions there are. So let's put our next
Now, the
question.
other one is, if understanding that under RAD, there's only 225 something thousand units nationwide that HUD approves. And yes, I read the one going to the board on Tuesday, that there's also the CHAP funds and all of that. But if the housing authority isn't approved right away, is there another scenario outside the RAD? Both of these are on that, and that's not a guarantee. There's got to be something else besides that, because there's no guarantee. It's just not if, ands, or buts, or maybe so. We hope we get it. You know, what's the other thing? There's a lot of fiscal needs and all of that. Now, I mean, they have to wait in line for all those 22,000, 25, and all, like you mentioned, public housing nationwide is in need of these kinds of things. So there's probably a lot of people on that waiting list. It's just like the housing choice voucher is about the community. You know I have one, and I've been on the list for 10 years, or since 2008. You know,
Great.
so I'm just saying that they might have to go on the list. And so what happens?
What's the process?
So the process as it has been began at 60,000 units for RAD. And that was the initial part. And each time that they have reached that level, they have increased it. So it's currently at 225,000. There are a number of housing authorities that are on the list to convert to RAD. Those that have not been ready, so I'm familiar with projects from New Mexico to New England, and those that have not been ready, HUD has said we're taking back the approval until you're ready, then you get to reapply, but we're giving it to those people that are ready to go now. Is there a process? Absolutely. Will it take some time? Absolutely. None of these scenarios are unfortunately guaranteed or easy. But what I will...
Funding on each one. When the contract ends, what guarantee is there that it will be renewed? What protection do tenants have into perpetuity?
There aren't, I mean, the program itself, are there any protections into perpetuity? No. Are there any protections into perpetuity right now?
As long as HUD is funding, which we never know because they are sketchy with everything. I know I'm in multi-family housing that isn't public housing under the FHA, which is project-based section 8. We're under the contract. So what guarantee would these residents have as opposed to the RAD? And yeah, that is the concern. With public housing, as long as HUD's pulling back on public housing and not funding it at the level it needs, but at least they know the owner can't opt out and decide to do something else or make it a different affordability.
I'm sorry to give you a negative answer, but
right, we will have none, right?
If I could just address. Yes, RAD, are there guarantees? No, but right now, I can tell you of public housing communities where HUD has said, you know what, this has reached the level of disrepair that we are not investing in this property anymore. And what they're doing is, public housing ended in this community, entire community. Public housing is ended, everybody gets a voucher, you get to move wherever you want.
I'm talking about contracts, though.
I understand that,
They
but
expire. What protections do tenants have when that expires, when the contract expires?
those are negotiable, but can I guarantee you what they are? No. It is negotiable to make, like many of these contracts are saying this has to remain affordable housing for the next 20, 40 years, well beyond the preliminary 20. But can I say that there's a guarantee? No, I'd be making that up. I can't. But what I'm also telling you is the guarantee of public housing isn't there anymore. In many, many communities where the level of disrepair has reached...
capital funds don't meet the need of repair. And this is only one. This is the largest one. He has 5 others.
So hold on 1 second. I want to talk a little bit about questions. We're going to take questions. I'm going to take Ms. Hattie first, and then I'm going to go to Royce. So the folks can just ask the question, we'll try and get the answer, and that'll allow us to keep on going. So go ahead.
Since we have got historical, and we have told you places where you could tap in, whether you tap in or not, it's like we just done something for nothing. We're not starting, but we are. So We need something better done about this, and just maybe some,
So, let me, can
I
I
mean,
ask?
I'm not getting like, we're the six. Everything's gonna be all right. We're not getting that.
Is the question more about the historical?
Yes.
You want to?
And that you have not tapped in
So I think-
all resources.
So, let me make sure that I'm understanding. I
Like,
understood.
day model, we did give you some kind of inset of different places that they still have money for places like this. Have they been tapped in?
So, about the review of sources.
So in the report, which you either have a copy or can get a copy, we reviewed all the sources that were given from the resident council, one by one. I think there's a page or half a page on every one. So what I asked you to do is read that,
Okay.
and what we found was some of them are applicable. Some are not applicable. Some aren't even feasible. Some are applicable for things other than construction costs of building, like artwork. So we went through them diligently, very diligently, uncovering every stone we could. And then in addition to that, we looked at sources that we normally understand. So we looked at all the sources, and you could read that in the report.
Okay.
There were not enough sources in what the resident council provided that filled the need. I mean, it just wasn't there.
But you,
We could argue about that too, but I
I was
think
just
I'd like
saying,
you to
we
read
gave you
that.
some resources. Did you give us any?
Yeah, well, we
Did you add
did.
in?
Absolutely.
As Dan said, some of them are not applicable, some of them are very limited. So some of them are, you could do, for example, something to denote the historic designation here. You could perhaps get funds to do a statue or signage or other things. They won't, it's not allowed to be used to, they don't give you the kind of money to come and rehab units. So there are limitations, and that's why we talked about, when we talked about financial feasibility, being able to meet the threshold requirements of those different funding sources to qualify for what this community needs, which is primarily for redevelopment and rehabilitation work of construction on the site.
Let me take this place.
No, well, just a couple of things. You know, the undercover threat of HUD saying that the property is too much and we just, you know, must be, we're not going to deal with it any longer. How can they say that in one breath when this authority is a high performer?
What is property too much? I didn't understand.
No, when they were saying,
So I gave it, so I was trying to explain, when I'm not going to stand here and say, RAD is guaranteed for life, but I'm also can't stand here and say, you know what, public housing is guaranteed for life as everybody.
no, I'm talking about, we're talking about the here and now, but you're implying that the property warrants beyond control.
I was not implying that this property is at that stage. I am saying that there are properties in the United States public housing system that because of this.
But we're talking about this property.
This is not
I
real.
didn't try to answer the question, but I was trying, I'm sorry.
If they were not good, they wouldn't have gotten that.
No, let's clear this up. There's a misunderstanding here. We actually worked on a project where the project was so far gone. I don't know if we should talk about it. I understand that, but please listen to me. We're not saying that's here. In fact, we're in time here. There's time to do all of this. You are not in that dire position, but we have experienced that. I think what Pradeep was saying, that has happened to communities. You're not there. You're not there. And if we gave you that impression, let's make sure we're clearing that up. We're not saying that that's your condition.
And what about the disparate impact that that scenario would have on us as residents as you disrupt our neighborhoods?
What disparity?
Of what?
For the building of, what, 140 some units.
And what,
20.
I kept asking, where would you put it? And what
So
would you-
you're
Yeah, let's
asking
change our neighborhood.
to become a mixed income neighborhood. Yes.
It's already mixed income.
Yeah, we got this.
Are you talking about the
Talking about
construction of
the whole Marin City.
process?
You're talking about the whole,
Process?
the whole.
when you're talking about the disruption of the construction process would create?
Adding these, if you were to add these, but I don't believe it anyway, I'm for the record. But if you were to add this 120 some units, it would create a disparate impact on our property.
And
Disparate in a negative term, you're saying.
Correct.
But Royce, do you mean
Fair
the
housing.
construction process, or do you mean having the
I think
units
she means the
there?
people.
Having the units, the units there, but even before you even get there, it's gentrification.
So let me clear
Surprise
something
word.
out. I
But
was
that's what it would be.
asked a question by,
And not only that, in going to, you know, when you talk about we're gonna just build a certain amount, but common sense will tell us that when you go to build anything in what little open space that there is, you're gonna be able to trigger something because you don't know what's all underground in terms of the wiring, all of the infrastructure that's underground, that would cause you to rightfully condemn other properties so that the whole thing ends up a condemned state.
so let's go, you said actually three things, let's go over some of them. You used the word gentrification, very emotionally charged term, okay? Some people use the term gentrification to say we're pushing out people.
You are.
Okay, that's your opinion, and you're certainly entitled to that. In scenario B, that's the reverse of what we're trying to do. The goal of scenario B, if you look at the goals on the slideshow presentation,
Page 38.
is to protect the resident households. Scenario B includes build first mentality, so gentrification does not happen where new people come in and move out existing people. So you're entitled to gentrification as a negative. What we're saying is a build first mentality allows people in this neighborhood to move into and stay on the site. And then when they go back, there are different levels of income that can then come in, all right? Those different levels of incomes typically are stratified. And we heard in one of the meetings, somebody who said, you know, I'm not income qualified to live here anymore, but I would like to live here. So one of the things that income stratification does, it's not a disparity in a negative way, it's diversity in a positive way. And we could either agree or disagree with that, but there are two ways to look at that. Income stratification allows what some term, public housing of the past, which isolated people in different income levels to be more stratified and be more connected. And that's the positive nature of income stratification.
You have two more, Dan? With the two that you were going to address?
No, the underground stuff, Bryce, you're absolutely correct. You know, you're in a basin here that has challenges. Even if you do nothing, the stormwater and erosion and the sedimentation control around here is challenging. Building new can either do two things: make it worse, which is what you're suggesting, or it could make it better. It could be the point of reinvestment. And we added money that wasn't in the PNA, I think it was $2 or $3 million, to try to make things better. This is not an engineering proposal at this time. We're not engineers, but from a feasibility standpoint, we think that money needs to be in there. Now people can decide, oh, you don't need to do that, that just inflates the numbers to 50 million. We think there are challenges underground, and then we walked around here placing them. We saw that, we saw the grass eroding. So are there challenges? Yes. Is this an opportunity to fix it? We think it is.
So Ms. Marin's going to be next, but I want to just check, okay, Josh, okay, I got 4, 3 or 5. Okay, let's go. 1.
There's been recent articles about in San Francisco, the mixed use that they've been building, and that a lot of the brick and mortar stores underneath are not, they're just sitting there empty because people are not being rentable and they're viable. So if it's already happening in San Francisco, I'm just curious why it would be, why would it work here?
So what Marin's talking about is mixed use. So we've used mixed in 2 terms so far. You've heard the term mixed income, and that is the stratification of people who have a little bit higher income levels. We've also heard the term mixed finance, which Pradeep talked about getting different sources of financing involved. You're talking about something called mixed use, mixture of uses, which is in addition to residential occupancy, that you have retail or commercial occupancy. This study does not cover mixed use at this point in time.
It's mixed income, that's what you're...
Right, so there's three types. There's mixed income, mixed finance, and mixed use. Those ground floor spaces, which normally are retail spaces that add to the financial viability projects, so they hope if they were occupied. When they're not occupied, it's negative. It's not necessarily something that's been discussed here tonight.
It's not at all. I mean, it's not something we did not contemplate any commercial activity on the site of these scenarios.
Yeah. Yeah. Now there could be, going forward, but that's not part of what we're.
And these proposed 120 units, are these low income? Are these? What's the?
I think
there are several tiers, and again, proposed for the Housing Authority and the community's consideration. But of those, so more or less 120, some would be project-based vouchers, which means probably a slightly higher income than traditional public housing, but it's still a limited income. It brings in additional rents because there's greater subsidies for it from HUD. Some would be tax credit, and as I was explaining to someone, even tax credit rents are tiered in 3 different categories, from 0 to 30% of area median income, which would be like public housing, from 30 to 60%, and 30 to 60, 60 to 80. So you have tiers of income qualification in the same way you do for vouchers. I believe in the scenario that we proposed, about 40 or 41 units would be market rate. And that would be rents that could be charged as if the open market. The other 80 plus, or 80 or so.
The nicer people, not nice live. So that's spread out amongst the community. So there's no separation of people with different incomes.
Have you tested this? Have you tested this anywhere?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All over.
Yeah, mixed income, that's how it's.
Okay, hold on. We've got our list, we've got our number. I think Josh is number 2. Let's go with the question.
I have I think a couple short clarifying ones. So I'm trying to understand the difference between scenarios 2 and 3, which were both ruled out for physical reasons, and option B or scenario B. They look similar to me in that they're increasing density, and so I know RAD's a significant difference, but physically.
I can take the 2 and 3.
Yeah.
I'll take the 2 and 3 question. I need my cheat sheet here.
Yeah, I did too.
It really has to do with scale.
Okay.
Okay, so one of the things that was challenging, I would say, for our team a little bit, is we were not hired to do physical planning. That's a service that we could provide. It might be one of the interim services that happen here, because people are asking, well, where are you going to build? Where are you going to build? And we said, oh, there's something, The difference between 2 and 3 very clearly is the word comprehensive, meaning in that model, we were thinking about total redevelopment, where a developer would come in. Remember that ESP model? It would be focused on the E. And from an economic standpoint, what would be the most advantageous thing to do? But we're not even sure that could happen with this historic designation, but we had to study that economically. That's comprehensive. That's number 2. Number 3 is almost like splitting the site, saying somebody with maybe a little more interest in architectural integrity would say, we're going to keep the high-rises, but we're going to redevelop all of the low-rises. So that's the physical difference between 2 and 3. Does that make sense?
I did understand that. What I'm trying to do is relate particularly 3 to B, because since neither are comprehensive, both slightly increased density.
That's the second question.
Yes.
I'll take that as well. We were not very pleased with 3. I was telling someone, I grew up in a garden apartment complex, just kind of like the low-rises. So this is sort of a personal thing, but maybe it doesn't affect the outcome. The beauty of the low-rises are not necessarily the buildings, but the spaces between the buildings and the scale of that. So in number 3, where we say wipe out the low rises, that's wiping out the memory of a community. So we use the word, I love low rises.
They have.
We use the word partial in B. That's the difference. So if you think of 3 different scales, number 2 being redevelopment of everything, number 3 being half. I'm just saying half and half. But scenario B is less than half. But we're not allowed to say where, when, or how much. That's for the next phase. Does that help you?
It does.
And it's hard, it's wordsmithing and stuff, but that's...
Yeah, I was just trying to visualize. I can visualize.
That's the difference
2 and 3.
between those 3. So B is a step down from
Got it.
3.
My second question, those are related, is on RAD, and actually goes back to the original question I don't think was answered. It ends with the original question, which is what happens if this project doesn't qualify for RAD? But it begins with the task force, which I was a part of, had at least 1 or 2 meetings where various experts were brought in, people that are running other public housing sites, other experts. And the impression I took away from those meetings was RAD's very competitive, you're unlikely to qualify. And that was part of why I thought the task force ruled it out as an option to begin with. But yet the only 2 that are feasible are RAD. So
let me say that RAD has evolved. So RAD begins in 2009, brought in as a concept by Sean Doctrine. And RAD is Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. So it is still a minor part of the entire HUD, affordable housing portfolio. But it starts with 60,000 units. Immediately, back then, the 60,000 units got applied for like that. Many housing authorities did. If you were on that first list, you got on there, you were moving, and all of a sudden it was people were applying. So, for example, the Chicago Housing Authority did not apply for RAD. And all of a sudden they said, what do you mean we're out? So then they submitted 10,000 units to be converted to RAD. I said, well, you're going to have to get in line because right now. They said, you know what, we're going to increase it. And they've been increasing it. They went from 60, they went to 180 at one point, they were 225. But those projects that are ready to go have been making room for them to have those projects that may have gotten a RAD approval, and yet we're not able to demonstrate that they were ready to go. It's being withdrawn, given to somebody else, and told you get back in line. What I can tell you, and all of this could change tomorrow, but right now, the only thing that's really moving at HUD is RAD conversions. And the only money that's being brought in, HUD is saying, you know what, you want to do something, you want to rehab a community, you want to redevelop something, you have to go to the RAD portfolio. You can apply, there's something called the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative. The amount of money has been reduced tremendously, but maybe that would be an option again. But that talks about comprehensive redevelopment, more than we believe would make sense here.
All right, so, in a competition, you may be the only people applying who are on the National Register of Historic Places. So where would that put you? Competition, bring it on, because you might have the most unique housing site in the country.
All right, Dan, I'm turning your attention over here. We've got 2 questions here. You want to do number 7? Yeah, so we've got, just so you know, we've got 2 here, then we're over here at Terry, then we're in the back of the room, then we're here, and then Royce. So you 2, fight it out. One or the other of you go.
Okay, well, I'm going to sit down. I get up and go right now. I got no problem. One thing everybody should realize about Marin County, there was a racial report that came out, and everybody needs to know about this, that Marin County is the #1 county of racial disparities in the state of California. That is totally embarrassing.
Yeah.
And the inequities exist all over the place, and this is now coming around where we have to acknowledge this, coming around to the point where we have to do something about it. The other piece is, when you mentioned RAD, I noticed it was, now let me go back to add. I noticed you took community land trust off the table. This home ownership. This is management by the community of its lands. This goes towards building, eliminate some of those inequities within the county. But it was not, it was taken off the table. When I quote you from this document, CVR found out that this interest was not universal among residents or the residents' council, with some expressing a desire for MSA to maintain ownership and management responsibility post revitalization. In other words, you're saying that we want to live under the thumb of MHA. That was in the and we're looking for home ownership. The other piece about the RAD, I didn't see. I didn't hear anything about people owning their own units. And is there provisions for people to have ownership, pass that along as a legacy to their families and things like that? We have to have ownership as a standard buffer against being told, a standard buffer against being manipulated by institutions from outside the community. And that's, we have a history of that, and that stuff has to stop. Everybody's going up on the new board. We realize that Marin City has to take ownership of its own destiny. And we can't do that by living under the thumbs of institutions.
Okay, who's taking that? You?
So, well, I will try. First of all, I understand what you said about the racial disparity and the income disparities that exist here, but the racial disparities, we did, and it's in an appendix because, again, we decided to take major sections out of the report so as not to focus the report on what was in our task for our contract. But there is a significant piece in an appendix on the history of Marin County. You recommended the book, The Color of Law, Richard Rothstein's book. I read it, and it begins with some of the things that if it can happen in San Francisco, then it can happen anywhere, and talks about Marin County and Marinship. So we try to be cognizant of the history of what's here, and part of the way we try to do that is recognizing the importance of trying to keep everybody on the site who is residing here, and that's what our efforts were in that perspective. You also talked about the land trust, and again, it's in an appendix. We took it out, our original report, we called it just so overwhelming, we took the appendix on land trust and moved it. We did an analysis, and it's in the report don't forget which appendix D or something like that, talks about what land trusts generally are, the ones that are. There isn't one of, they're primarily, almost all of them are for the preservation of land, for no development, no residential use, and they are for keeping land. There's a lot, there's a couple of them in Marin County.
There's 300 community land trusts across the nation and in Canada.
There are many land trusts, but most of them are for
housing, community housing.
They are on a much smaller scale. However, let me say that I'll take this upon myself. I need to go back and read exactly your words that you read there, but I, for one, would not recommend to the Housing Authority that it should make every effort to give up this site as a land trust, and because it has an obligation, this is the only family site, public housing site that currently exists in Marin County for the potential needs of future residents of Marin County who might need to live in public housing. So I did not see it
It's not going to be public housing under these plans.
I'm sorry? So in that sense, we did not see either a community land trust fitting in within this scenarios that were viable for now. The idea of taking the property and putting in a community land trust would require a variety of steps, which will take a very long time, including showing HUD that you have the resources to acquire the land.
It's happening all over though. It's happening throughout the United States. I mean, why can't we develop a team, a feasibility team that looks specifically at, that type of land management?
I will at least suggest you, I'm not saying you're telling me it's happening all over the United States. I will take you at your word, but I will say that you would have to be able to demonstrate to HUD that you are buying the land at fair market value, and that you have the ability to operate it and you have the resources to operate it. Because otherwise, HUD is going to say, why should we give this up if we're not getting value for it?
Did you talk to Gus Newport about this?
Yes, we did. It's in the report.
Okay.
Our conversations with
And he
Betsy
talked about the private public ownerships, you know, the combinations that come together to make these things happen. And how it was successful in Boston and Raleigh and New Mexico and L'Oreal Force Base. You got one out in West Marin. Did he talk to you about any of those things?
I'm not going to speak for Mr. Newport.
Okay.
Because that wouldn't be my right. I think you can call him and talk to him about what we talked about. We have in the report our findings with him, and they were not positive for doing this as a community land trust. But you can read that yourself.
I only wish I had the money, the resources to develop our own legal team and research team to really look at these things the way they need to be looked at. You know, and this is a matter of social justice. We're not being benefited, you know, completely by having one sign. When you have viable options over there that can confer home ownership to residents of the community, people who've been living here for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, they deserve more.
Frederick, I'm guessing that that's not a
Don't
question.
everybody go stop them, you know.
No, I don't think anyone disagrees. I think that this may not be the tool that we can use in this situation. Frederick, were you asking a question next?
Well, I do have a question, which is it common in studies like this, in situations like this, to move forward on a $139 million project where right at the outset you have an $18 million bust in financing? And do housing authorities say yes, green light to that, and end up completing it successfully?
I believe I mentioned that everything we were talking about showed significant gaps, and that I said 7- and 8-figure gaps. But yes, those things do happen. That's why they're broken down into phases, because they cannot, the money isn't there. It takes years to achieve it. When HUD was giving greater funds, at one point HUD was, under the Clinton administration, there was the Hope 6 program, and they might give you 20 or 30 or at the beginning $50 million to redevelop a property. That's no longer the case. That program is no longer existing. So there are funding gaps. The way you look at it is, how do we phase it? Again, one of the things we said, talking to a developer, but I would like to probably say an experienced developer who's experienced with working with affordable and public housing, and which has a great track record, whether they're for-profit or not-for-profit, but have a good track record and deep pockets to do the kind of work that needs to be done to address those gaps. So you would take it, you would reduce it by phase, and whether you're getting 9%, you're doing, those things do happen. I have worked, I'm familiar with housing authorities that have undertaken, 9 figures or over $100 million projects and done it over the course of sometimes 8, 9 years, but they've done it and they've addressed it in time, cobbling the funds from different sources and still trying to meet the needs of that community. So I didn't say it was easy.
Okay. When you talked earlier about option 1, you said the funding gap was too large. You couldn't find funding. What is the gap here? How much is that? The other question is, how do you go from 17 million to 50 million to 100-something million to fix up the apartments? What did you all base that on? Is there something that we can get to? And then was there an independent, what can I say, an independent assessor outside of yourself looking at this?
So you had 3 questions. If you go to 4, those are 3. If you go to 4, I'll forget the first 3. So let's pick up.
Okay, so the funding gap is too large, you said, for number 1, option 1.
Yes.
And you talk about the funding gaps, but you all have funding, you keep talking about nothing but gaps. I want to know what is the gap? What's the funding gap?
I'll find that in a moment. I'm going to go like this. I'll find the number.
Okay.
Your second question was, how did the 50 million estimate had to do with the new construction of the 120 new units?
Oh, the new construction. So I was thinking in terms of if we are looking at rehabbing and
let me try to answer your question. So when we looked at the rehabilitation, the average cost per unit was $168,000. You want to do the math in your head. If you take the $50 million number and divide it up by the number of units, 168,000. So it's good to understand how these very large numbers then relate to a specific unit. Now that 168,000 is not only inside those four walls, it has to do with new roofing and new windows and new site work. Okay? We then had to find a cost for the new construction, right? Because the new construction, if we go with scenario B, is 120 units. So CSG advisors did research in this community about contemporary housing costs for new units. And they applied that per unit cost to the 120 units, and that took the number from 50 million prior to the 130 million. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, but
that was question number 2. That was question number 2.
Didn't really consider adding new units.
Right, I'm clarifying.
Yeah,
We're communicating.
Right,
Number 3, the independent assessment. No, this was internal amongst our group.
I know, because one of the things that's clear is that it really feels that your group, this group, you all, really aren't community-based. You really aren't reflecting the sentiments of the community. That's, if nothing else is clear, that's clear.
So let me take that on.
So
Is that a question
I got
or
some more. I got
statement?
That's a
No
statement.
question.
And then the other one had to do again with what Ricardo was talking about in terms of the land trust, historic preservation, and the fact that you all talked about what folks said in Marin City. I said, clearly we need a new survey, you know, because you can't justify something when it may not be reality, you know. So I guess for you all to rule out so many things that the community wants in terms of land trust, historic preservation, I'm like, what gives you the right to do that?
That's
I'm
a question.
having a hard time.
So you asked the question at the end. What gives you the right? So that is a question, so it's not a statement. I have to respectfully say that the community's best interests are included here. Historic preservation is at the very basis of scenario B, and that is respect for the architectural and historical legacy of the site. The deep green retrofit is part of not only the goal, but we put finances into the construction costs for deep green.
I know there's a lot of money for deep green.
Number 1, I'm keep going. And then number 3, the idea of, remember that first goal, protecting the household and the residents? Scenario B includes a method for keeping people on site. Okay, that is one of the most important things here, and I want to make sure that that Gulf first understanding doesn't get swept under the rug. That allows people to stay here. In the scenario without the new construction, 60 to 80 households have to move off-site somewhere to a place that nobody has identified. That is not in the community's interest. So I will say that we tried, and we think we accomplished, to hit all the 6 goals that were on the community working group. So to classify that as not being in the community's interest, I think we have a difference in, I understand, I think we have a difference of opinion.
Well, I mean, I want to know, you when you talk about RAD, and it says that they're, I guess, a private investor, right? Goes into private investment. Is that
User bring in under tax credits or leverage.
And at some point, hopefully soon, you'll let us know who are those potential developers you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's important.
It is very important. And in
Okay,
fact,
and we got for that.
Well,
You
we don't-
need to share that with
If
us.
the housing authority, you know, you could take this report and shelve it, put it on a shelf and decide we want to forget about it.
Did you say shelf it or shove it?
I said shelve it.
I just
I put words in my mouth.
I just didn't hear it.
So the report does, it gives you a potential scenario. We do recommend that the housing authority talk to good, experienced developers. So, but, I mean, I can name you companies that do that, but that's not what we were asked to do, and that's not our role. In terms of investors, good developers will go out and say, how do I get the best value? They try to create a competition. So the investors today that companies that invest in low-income housing tax credits include Google. And
I just wanted to know, have you all identified? I mean, you like the way.
That was the next step. So
Yeah.
that last slide was that the housing authority
I
was.
think you all really think people don't understand what's going on. The other thing is, when you talk about 120 units, and then you make another statement, of course, someone can come in, and those units could jump up 200, 300, 400 more units. You know,
Well, if
ever.
it's involved, then probably wouldn't.
I beg your pardon?
There's a community process involved. It's not like a developer
The
comes in and
community
does it.
process has been thrown out the window, that's it. Anyway,
All right.
so, you know, I just, as a community resident, I just have some real concern about this. I did read the report. I have some real concerns about this because it feels like a loss of community to me. Very much like a loss of community. And so, it has to be, we have to have another middle ground. You all sound like this is cutting in stone.
This is a historic.
And, no, that's what it's not the whole meeting. And so it makes us, or it makes me, honey, baby. So it makes me feel like, you know what? We have to look at some other alternatives. You know, the first thing comes to mind is like, we need a legal team. We probably talked about a legal team. This doesn't sound like community. It sounds like a raping of the community to me. And I'm really concerned about this process. I just want to let you know.
Thank you for your thoughts.
All right, so I'm going to the back of the room. Who's your advice?
I've got 3 points. First of all, I have an earnest plea. I don't think this is ready for acceptance by the Board of Supervisors on Tuesday. I think there are too many extraneous questions and considerations. There are some questions that I have about the relative rents that could be charged. That's not in the report. That's not a financial analysis. That should be in there. Second, I've been to a lot of the meetings over the last 4 or 5 years, and RAD had been discussed, and I don't know that I can quote, but I think he's been videotaping a lot of these. I think there were several times when RAD was dismissed because it changed the platform. And just as you were saying, there's no way you could stand there and guarantee going forward that it would continue. You cannot guarantee that public housing would continue. But RAD is one step along the way towards, for lack of a better word, privatizing the provision of housing in partnership with HUD. And I think the last thing that Marin City needs is debt. And to go through tax credits, that's what you're creating. The last point is that the language is a slippery thing. And my understanding was that displacement was to be resisted at all costs. It was the #1 guarantee. In this report, it's been reinterpreted. The new version is permanent involuntary displacement. And one of the scenarios that you talk about and you dismiss because you think it would result in 84 people being displaced to Lorna Doone, which is where no place exists like where affordable, where there's 84 people would just disappear into the vapor, and they may or may not be able to return or be willing to return. And you've sort of alluded to the fact that that's probably a 2-year process. So who knows what kind of roots they put down over there, all the things. And my concern is that if this is presented to the Board of Supervisors, no, to the Commissioners of the Housing Authority on Tuesday as a complete report, it will be turning your back on the 8 years of public input.
Oh, I'm traveling around with the right order that we should. Oh, sorry, my apologies. Lost track.
So I'd like to underscore and agree with Dave Corey, what he just said, in terms of thinking, this report is not ready to go to the Board of Supervisors for approval. I've been looking at this, I've been reading the contract to see which we're contracted to do, which includes some deliverables that talk about the feasibility study where the two options that were listed was mixed use and historic development. And somehow this whole thing has morphed then into a recommendation to support scenario B, which was never a part of what the initial scenarios were that the working groups all agreed on. Nor in your public meeting records is there any indication that you ever made clear to the community that you were considering a movement from looking at mixed use and historic designation and somehow that morphing into something called scenario B. So I think there needs to be some additional work that if you look at the deliverables in the contract, I won't read these, but I don't think you're coming through and delivering what you said you were going to.
Is that a question or a statement?
That's a statement. And then I'd like to add just another thing in terms of the point about RAD and that being dependent on either what you now call scenario A or B, but in B. And just to call to your attention that in your own appendix, pages 11 and 12, you say, while these programs, you're referring to these different kinds of funding options, but including RAD, have helped many housing authorities, they are highly competitive, cost prohibitive, and require high thresholds for participation. In most instances, these grants are not widely accessible to smaller housing authority, which I assume Marin would fall into that category of being one of the smaller housing authorities with limited resources. So there's also a part of contradictions that seem to be coming in through the work that you've done. And so I would just encourage that this be withdrawn from the agenda for Tuesday's agenda and that there be a more thorough compliance with what the contract called for.
I have two questions. One is, people are talking a lot about the desire for opportunities for home ownership, whether that be through a land trust or different modalities, but is there a way to incorporate below market rate home ownership opportunities in a potential RAD scenario, or market rate, or a combination of below market rate and market rate? Because we didn't hear anything about, you know, some sort of home ownership being an opportunity in RAD conversion. And then the second question I have is, in your guys' experience in this sort of process, what we hear from a huge amount of people in the community is they want to stay in Marin City, they don't want to leave. But there may also be some people who, if given the opportunity to either stay in Marin City in a new unit or a rehab unit or move, that they would like to move. So in this kind of scenario, would current residents be offered the possibility to take a voucher and say move up to where their mom lives in Nevada, or move somewhere else, or take that opportunity to, so can that happen as well? Would residents potentially have the opportunity to have a voucher instead of staying?
So, if I try to answer your first question first. Homeownership was a big part of HUD in the 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s. The economic downturn in 2008 had a huge impact. Homeownership, below market rate homeownership, has to be subsidized. The reality is that somewhere the money has to come from. Traditionally, it has come from sources that HUD would provide and would allow. Most of those, all of those, have dried up. So it's very hard. HUD is not saying, here, we're going to give you an extra $25 million to help you provide homeownership opportunities to individuals who can then require these. And even in those cases where it did, I'm familiar with projects that included a homeownership component, the people still had to have some level of qualifying for those, and there was some assistance or subsidy. It was not a, you now have the property. So that is a distinction that has to be made. I'm not currently aware of any significant resources that would allow the housing authority, if it chose to say, we're going to turn these 296 units into homeownerships for the current residents.
We may be, as that our housing authority may be uniquely positioned because we do have a below market rate homeownership program within our housing authority. It's housed with us, it's not housed within community development, so it may be something worth looking at. I'm not saying all 296 units, but maybe offering 5 or 10 units that income qualified people who had the ability to get a mortgage or have an opportunity to do so would be something really nice.
I understand. Then there will be the question, and I'm not saying no. All of these are good things to explore, but the majority of these units are in a certain level of disrepair. Some of the systems of the property need to be repaired. So that generally, before you can sell someone a property, it has to be at least at a certain standard of operating condition and repair. And that's something that would have to be addressed, which has costs with it. Your second question about the vouchers, if the housing authority were to pursue that, there are options in certain cases that would be limited. If you're converting to that and you're going to do some activities, there may be some opportunities to say, you know what, we will, usually if you demolish, that's the case, but if you're not demolishing, it's harder to say, but there may be opportunities to say, people are saying, you know what, I'm going to move if I can get a voucher, and that generally it happens when you're doing demolition. But I do know that there are options. They would be relatively limited. It would not be like all of the residents would be able to say, I want a voucher, so you give me one now. That would require a demolition process, which would be something completely different.
Do you know
Oh, actually, yeah, so I actually want to let people know that we're at 8:15. There are some people who have not spoken at all.
An attorney right there, David Levin.
And David is first on my list. I know Aura also has her hand up. I don't know if there's anyone else who hasn't had a chance to ask a question, who's got a burning question, and then otherwise I think we're gonna end for this evening.
There's something down here that is really false, and I try to hold it in.
Let's start with David.
Oh, thank you. I have a question. There seems to be a glaring omission on financial analysis because you focus on page 13 on the HUD funding, but it's hard to find any information about the rent income, that revenue. It seems like it'd be really important to understand the financial opportunities here and also have some accountability, for how this situation came about. If you understood where the rent has been going, because that must be somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million or more people are paying Golden Gate Village in rent. And it's hard to find anything at all in the report about, that's a lot of money, $1 million a year for, 40, 50 years now. So the questions that raises where the rent's been going.
So you'd like that added to the report, I think.
Well, yes, it seems to raise these questions. Where has that money all been going? Why hasn't it been going towards keeping the place up? Okay, because I'm sure you've heard about legal cases involving what's called de facto demolition of public housing units where it's intentional to just let them go. And so where's the money been going? And also compare what's happening with other properties owned by the same housing authority. There's 5 other properties, senior disabled. How come those, we're not talking about those? I mean, we mentioned the demographic issues that raise real serious fair housing concerns, but also you may have heard Marin County somehow found about $10 million just a few weeks ago to buy a golf course for another park. This is a county already 85% of the county is parks. Right. So maybe there should be some accountability at the Board of Supervisors level But again, how can you even figure out a way to point that out without looking at the total financial picture, including the contribution the residents have been making, you know, $1 million a year or more. So it's really surprising that's not in the report.
Mrs. Ware?
And I just want to be certain that Mary and if there was, and that Royce, they get to speak, because I don't want to speak and have them not be able to speak.
You can do all.
Okay, thank you. I do want to say also, there's, every project is unique. So I know that you did have a little tiny piece in there about the townhomes. But again, there's ways of transferring land without paying money. You can lease it for $1 like they did for 99 years from HUD. But to, in other words, to put, and actually I've talked to Lily Thomas about this, and she said, once you have a viable land trust, the county will talk with you. But to David's point, not only that, but they're starting to put scaffolding up for the roof of the Civic Center, which is $16 or $17 million, and no one lives there. And both of these projects were built and designed at the same time by the same people, and they're both architecture for democracy. One is housing and one is the Civic Center. They are really, they both should grant the same. So we have a housing trust fund, we have the Buck Family Fund, we have community. Once we get some seed money, like any project, once we get some support to write and encourage Congressman Huffman to do as he said, to write to the Fed. Now we're on the National Registry as a federal property. We are maybe one of the only, like you said, public housing. We're a unique project. But like the townhomes, they brought in, like Royce talked, and been doing so much work, really on the ground work, that once someone moves out, you need someone in with that higher level. You don't just destroy a community to do that. You build your land trust, you build your equity from the inside out. If the people were hired to do the landscaping like they were before, that money from the people that live there gets paid higher rents. That money then goes to feed into the system. So there's many different ways of looking at it. Every community is a unique project. I think the most important thing we need to work on is our communication with the housing authority. We need to collaborate. We need to come together. We need to quit fighting and using so much money on legal fees and studies. We need to begin to repair this, and I know we can because you know, as a designer, I know we can think outside of the box, and I know so many projects where pro bono work of architects from around the world will come and do it. So that's not even factored in. The fact of having a net zero or a zero energy building and actually being paid for the energy instead of it costing more, instead of paying $1 million for boilers we won't need in the future. So I'm done, but that's what I'm saying. So I think the relationship is the most important thing.
So we're going to take Mary and Royce, and we'll wrap it up for this evening.
I'll go first and when I finish. I just am concerned when you talk about 50, 60 families maybe getting vouchers and moving somewhere. There's several of us, myself included, you can't find places out there. And Sonoma County has now had all the fires. So you're looking at moving so far. Fresno, that now you're not anywhere close to your community.
You're saying
just
saying
people that get Section 8 vouchers now in Marin, it is so hard to find any kind of spot that you're having to go out of Marin and port out to another place. The farther you go, the farther you are from your community. So all these families have to leave whoever they have here, they can't get back.
That is the primary reason about the build first scenario B. So you don't have to do that. Do you understand that?
I understand the meetings feel like everything all the time that it's been all of the time telling you what you wanted, and it just doesn't feel like we're getting kind of any of what we want. And it feels like, what do you do all that for?
I can see what Mary's saying. Explain.
So in scenario B, we are not saying that 50 or 60, in scenario B, we are not saying 50 or 60 families have to take Section 8 vouchers and find a new place. We are not saying that. What we're saying in scenario B, it's a build first mentality where new construction would provide housing on site. So when neighbors are the units are being renovated, those people can actually move into the new construction first and stay on site. That's the primary reason that scenario B was one of the primary reasons scenario B was selected, so they would not have to try to take 50 or 60 vouchers and find a place that doesn't exist. So we are in agreement with what you're saying.
So then it would convert after they move back into the other levels of housing?
No, it could still. No, I think what we also said, that's dispersed throughout the communities, so the same type of income that is being supported now would be in the new construction as well. It's not separated, it's all integrated. But I want to go there.
I just want to say, in 2016 and again in 2017, when different parts of our team met with our Congressman Jared Huffman, both of them were prior to Golden Gate Village actually being on the historic registry. We were told in 2016, and not by me by myself, but with a group of people, Ricardo was there in 2016, if in fact Golden Gate Village was able to get on the National Registry, it would change the ball game. When we met with him in September, prior to it actually being placed on the registry in the housing office, he had said, again, if it gets on the registry, then of course, I'm going to do all that I can to bring federal dollars. But we know that West Marin, I had the opportunity to talk with Dennis, said that that was a deal. There's some little legislation that Congressman Huffman wrote up for the Navy for that piece of property. We also know that in Point Arena, our congressman, that was his first act, to be able to write up legislation for it to be what it is. So again, when we met in September, that is our request, and I haven't heard anything tonight as it relates to you really digging into Congressman Huffman's promises to the people as it relates to a special, for Golden Gate Village to be designated as a special project for the GSA Renewable Energy Lab. What kind of money would that bring in? What are they talking about? You didn't, no mention of that. As well as the Army Corps of Engineers through their historic preservation sector of that new law, that is still new law, as well as the historic tax credits, that's 20%. They didn't lose it, they still got the 20%. That wasn't really deep dive into. And so I know that this county, if they're able to find millions here and find millions there, and they're talking about the equitable, equity, that this is their opportunity to really...
Those millions here.
Right here. Right here. So the money that you talked about is not impossible money in terms of Golden Gate Village. Yes, it can be a model across the nation as zero, net zero, energy efficient. In fact, when we talked to the GSA, was really encouraged in terms of this could be really an opportunity. But I didn't hear you mention that at all. It's not in the report. Your conversation with the GSA.
What's in the
report? And how much money did they say what it would cost in terms of doing the project? You talked about, the astronaut, but you didn't mention that. And then lastly, when you talked about, and you said many different things about oh, it can't work in your plan, but it can sure work in ours. And so, and this is what we had told you from the beginning, that you were cherry picking what you like from our plan, which would make it a complete, not only just Golden Gate Village revitalization, but Marin City as a whole. You know, you talked about the hub in terms of transportation, this, that, and the other. So, and then to say, on page 34, that the CVR team was made aware of the interest to convert operations at GGB to a community land trust model. CVR found that this interest was not universal among the residents or the resident council. Now, how are you going to tell that? Audacious, untruth. With some expressing a desire for MHA to maintain ownership and management responsibilities. That's what we're wanting to get from under the oppression of the mismanagement, gross mismanagement of the Marin Housing Authority, not just this year, but for years. Gross mismanagement. And to say, oh, we support, you know, oppress us more, oppress us more. That's not, you know, that's not true at all. And so what did you really do? Nothing as it relates to really equally vetting out our plan. You didn't do it. You did not do it in plain English. And so with this report, you know, I refuse this report. I refuse it in the mighty name of, okay, Jesus. I refuse this report. Now you could come back with a real report that supports the people, the residents, in plain English. Because we're not going to go anywhere in plain English. And if you, anybody in here remember when that presentation that I had the opportunity to sit on that? No, I'm talking about in San Rafael. It's going to be, you think we're going to roll over because you said so? Or Louis Jordan say so? Or the County of Marin Board of Supervisors say so? If it means spending it in court, then so be it. But in the meantime, we know money talks. And so we will continue on because you're not going to continue, oh, we'll wait about another 20 years and we won't do anything to the property. I mean, and that's just how it's happening. You know, deliberate. Take pictures of stuff that's happening, you know, now. Oh well, we're going to do something. All the false, you know, just lies and bodacious lies. So this report could be some good toilet tissue if you feel me. So because it does not reflect, it reflects you because that's who you are. I mean, understand that. Understand that I know it reflects you. Okay? So it reflects you. Good, it reflects you, but it don't reflect us. And so it ain't going to be a rollover. It's not going to be a rollover. And so definitely, it's not going to be a rollover. You think you're going to come in here and gentrify? And one last thing, you claim, oh, I don't know where we can put this. Don't forget, Mary and I were there when you gave your presentation, so don't, you know, this is nothing new. Dan Ackerman in 2009, he already had that same little plan. So I said, it ain't really Lewis. Lewis is just being puppeted on along with their plan to continue to move poor people, poor black people forced out of Marin County in the name of being equitable.
Marin's #1.
Well, that wasn't ended, for sure.
It ain't over. You know what? Delays have not been